I'm Richard with EV4U Custom Conversions, and a little follow-up on last week's show. We're running in the brushes, the new brushes that we installed, and the first thing we noticed was that there was quite a bit of noise. So we ran them for a few minutes and pulled a few of them out, take a look at them, and sure enough, they needed to be seated. And so we're going to take a little closer look at their brushes and give you an update on the brushes we pulled out, the original brushes that we pulled out. So stay with us. All right. So, like I said, when we first installed the new brushes and started the motor, it was quite noisy, and it sounded like it was just running on the edge of a brush is the sound. We'll do it and you'll get to hear it. So we ran it a few minutes and then pulled a few of the brushes to take a closer look, and sure enough, it's just making contact on the leading edge. And so here's 30 or 40 minutes worth of wear. We'll see if it'll show on camera. See the shiny portion there? That is the only part that's making contact with the commutator at this time. And so, in taking on just a quick lap around the building, definitely notice a lack of power, and that's because we're not getting the contact here and the current flow. And so we're going to have to do a little break-in on this, and so we're running the motor without load, and let it spin up about 2,500 RPMs or so, and let these things seat in. So, may not do the freeway run that we promised you last week, because I want to make sure these are seated in well before we start pumping, trying to pump that many amps through it. So, probably see a week's delay there. The other thing I wanted to share with you from last week, we pulled all the brushes out. We only pulled a couple of them out on camera, but then we pulled the remaining brushes. And one of the things that that we now noticed was that only 2 of the brushes had markings on them. One of the inboard brushes and one of the outboard brushes. And to refresh you, the reason for pulling the brushes and replacing them was that we had a difference in wear between the inboard and outboard brushes, a substantial difference. And so what we did is we contacted NetGain to see what they thought. They thought it was probably selective brush wear, and sent us some replacement brushes, some harder brushes, which we're going to have to seat. So, looking at the part numbers though, is that they have completely different part numbers. And it is my premise, as I had said from the get-go, that I thought the brushes were of 2 different hardness. Those on the inboard ones being harder than those on the outboard, and thus not wearing as rapidly. And one of the idiosyncrasies on the brushes is that they don't give you the hardness rating. It's not imprinted on here anywhere, and so we don't know. but seeing that they have a different part number, I'm thinking that there's a difference in hardness also, which would easily explain why all of the inboard brushes wore at one rate and are all the same, and all the outboard brushes wore at a different rate and are the same. And so, anyway, that's kind of the bottom line on our brush inspection and replacement from last week. So this week we'll be seating the new brushes, prepare the Karmann Ghia to go back into service. Kind of miss it. It's my daily driver. And so, but I've been busy with so many other things that haven't got to play with it much. So anyway, we will seat in the new brushes, and as soon as they're making good contact and are able to carry 500 amps, which is what our controller is rated at, we'll put her back on the freeway. And we'll put the GoPro in the car and take you along with us and let you see what the performance and so forth is like on the electric Karmann Ghia featuring EV4U's commuter package. The commuter package is a 14.6 kilowatt hour lithium battery pack, a Warp 9 or Impulse 9 motor, and a 500 amp Curtis 1231C controller. We've put these in many cars. It's an excellent conversion. Just, you know, very reliable, all the basics. Performs just beautifully, makes a great daily driver, commuter vehicle, run around. Just a great setup for vehicles that are driven in moderately hilly terrain like we have, at level, and, you know, freeway capable. Now, on vehicles that are heavier than 3,000 pounds or that have steep, long grades to deal with at freeway speeds and so forth, we make adjustments to that. But for the part of the country we're in, where it's mostly flat, especially south of us where most of our market is, the commuter package works excellent. So anyway, we'll answer some viewer questions for the rest of this week's episode. And then next week, as part of next week's show, we'll include the freeway run in the Karmann Ghia. Well, I want to thank everyone for sending in your questions to the EV Answer Man. And we're, you know, sorting through and picking out the ones that we think have the most interest to the most people. The rest of them we do answer via email, and so we appreciate all the questions. And in this episode we're going to address a very common one, and that is, why do conversions use a transmission? And the short answer is that it has to do with motor RPMs. But we're going to give you a little more in-depth explanation, and we'll walk through that a little bit. So let's take a look. All right. We're going to do a few calculations here to figure out, you know, why the transmission is necessary, and what gear ratio and so forth, you know, is required to accomplish what we want to accomplish. So first off, we took some measurements, and on the Karmann Ghia, we'll use the Karmann Ghias for our example. And for one revolution of the tire that's on the Karmann Ghia, tire size that we're running, we get 71 inches per revolution. So for every revolution of the tire, the car moves forward 71 inches. And so then we calculated how many inches are in a mile, and I'm assuming there's 5,280 feet in a mile, if I remember correctly, times 12, 63,360 inches per mile. So tire revolutions per mile then figures out to be 892.4. And at 85 miles an hour, we're going 1.4 miles per minute. And 1.4 miles is 1,249.4 revolutions of the tire. So that equates that 1,249.4 revolutions per minute at 85 miles per hour. So now we know how fast that tire is going at 85 miles an hour. And we're using 85 miles an hour as a maximum speed. In other words, if we're going to design an electric car and we're going to design the motor and gear set, that's going to be the top speed that we're going to aim for. That's faster than any legally posted speed in the United States, and so I think we're good there. I know a lot of OEMs use that 85 to 90 range as a maximum that they program things to top out at. So that's the number we're using. And then another figure that we're going to use that's common, and again it's selected by manufacturers, and that's a 8.25 to 1. Cars like the Tesla, the Nissan Leaf, the Mini, so forth, the Mini E, they all run approximately an 8.25 to 1 ratio. And so, based on our tire size and using that gear ratio, at 85 miles an hour, our motor would have to spend 10,308 RPMs. Well, that's where the problem comes in. The motors that we use in conversions typically have a 5,000 to 6,000 RPM limit. I believe the AC50 has a 6,000 RPM limit. The Impulse 9 and the Warp 9 from NetGain, I believe one's 5,000, the other's 5,500. And so that's kind of the range that you typically see in motors that are used in a typical conversion. So we have a limit there. And so based on that limit of 5,000 to 6,000 RPMs, and we're going to use the higher one for this calculation here, at 6,000 RPMs, at the 8.25 to 1 ratio, that would give us a tire RPM of 727, and that equates to 49 miles per hour. So at that gear ratio, that red line on our motor, we're going to top out at 49 miles per hour. Now that's better than an NEV, but that's not what any of us are targeting. And so what would we need? So let's drop down to the 5,000 limit. So at 5,000 RPMs, to hit 85 miles per hour, we need a 4 to 1 gear ratio. And so, 4 to 1 ratio at 43 miles an hour That's 2,500 RPMs. That part's fine and dandy. And just to give it kind of a reference point, our marketing vehicle, Bob, the red VW Beetle, at 3,000 RPMs is doing 45 miles per hour, and that's in third gear. Now, in third gear, you can take off from a standstill in third gear, and it tacks out at 5,000 RPMs at about 60 miles an hour, if I remember correctly. And so you could go 0 to 60 in third gear. The downside of that is, at the lower speeds, especially the initial start, requires a lot of torque. Requires a lot of energy at that gear ratio to get the vehicle moving. And so it's not the most efficient gear ratio for the full range of 0 to 60. Once you're up and rolling, it's fine. And we have a lot of customers with the Porsche 911s and so forth that use third gear all the time. And I don't remember how their third gear equates to the Bug's third gear. I want to say they're a little lower. Most of them are 5 speeds. So third gear might be a little bit lower. But anyway, it's going to consume more energy to take off. And so if you're doing stop and go driving all the time, it just wouldn't be a good choice. But 8 1/4 to 1, that'd be a good choice for our stop and go. The downside would be at the upper end. And so that's why we use a transmission. The transmission gives us the option of using multiple gear selections, multiple gear ratios, to achieve a 0 to 85 speed in the most efficient gear ratio per given ground speed. And so another common question then is, can you use an automatic transmission? And the answer is yes. The reason you don't see them too often is that they're not as efficient. You have a torque converter that is not the most efficient coupling method, but it does allow you to stop. It does allow automatic gear changes, and it allows you to stop in gear. And so when you're on the open road and you're up to speed, the torque converter will actually lock up and give you a direct coupling, which then pretty much, you're on par with the standard transmission. But getting there, you're going to have slippage in that torque converter, which is going to affect your efficiency. And so, to each their own, but in my mind, one of the objectives of an electric car is to be efficient. I mean, they're much more efficient than internal combustion. That's the beauty of an electric car. And so doing something that decreases that efficiency, such as an automatic transmission, really is kind of going the wrong direction in my mind. As we just discussed, you don't have to shift that much with the manual transmission. You can choose, around town a lot of times, I take the lazy route and run in second gear. I can take off briskly in second gear and in the Bug do 0 to 40. And so that covers, the in-town driving. The Karmann Ghia has custom gear ratios in it that the previous owner had done, and it's geared a little bit lower than the Bug, and so can't go quite as fast in second gear. And so I typically use second, third, and fourth in the Karmann Ghia. basically 0 to 30 in second, 30 to 45 in third, and fourth gear beyond that. And then once I'm driving around, if I slow down to make a turn or something, anything 30 miles an hour and above, I'll just leave it in fourth because it'll pull fine. And I'm not, talking about efficiency, I'm not the most efficient driver typically on a day-to-day basis. I drive what feels good and fun to me. I like acceleration, and so I'm not the most efficient driver of an electric car or any other. I like to get out and go. But we're going to show you one more kind of example of the gear ratio speed relationship. So let's move over and take a look at that. All right, here's just a little graph I made to kind of depict the relationship. And so on the bottom axis here we have the gear ratio. Here's your 8 1/4 to 1. Here's the 4 to 1 that we discussed. And on the vertical axis we have speed. And so here's our target of 85 miles per hour. And so the line between them here is representative of the slope at that gear ratio. And it also will represent RPMs. So at the 8 1/4 to 1, it's like driving up this slope. And that's all gearing is it's taking and multiplying your torque. And so this is a less of a slope at an 8 1/4 to 1 gear ratio than a 4 1/4 to 1 gear ratio is. But you can see that this distance and this distance are different. This is a longer distance. This, like I said, also represents RPM. So it takes a greater RPM range to go from 0 to 85 miles per hour at 8 1/4 to 1 than it does at 4 1/4 to 1. But at 4 1/4 to 1, it's taller. We'd have to be pulling a steeper grade, so to speak. And so, like I mentioned a minute ago, taking off in third gear, the issue one, I mentioned efficiency, but it's also the rate of acceleration. It's going to require more torque to get that vehicle moving. We only have so much available based on the motor and controller and so forth that you're using. And so you're going to, the taller the gear, the less rate of acceleration you'll have. So that's the long explanation on why we use a transmission. Is that ability to split the gear ratios amongst different ones to achieve a brisk acceleration from the start and yet still achieve a top-end speed that's desirable, and to maintain the most efficient motor RPM for a given ground speed. So anyway, until next week, I'm Richard with the EV Answer Man, and again, you want to address your questions to info@evforyounow.com, and you can check out our website at evforyounow.com and see other resources that we have available for those that are interested in converting their own vehicle. Thanks for watching.